Loki is literally the showstopper for Norse mythology. But did you know that apart from the god of mischief, there was another giant that went by the same name? Yes, the giant was Útgarda-Loki of Jotunheim, and he had one thing in common with the god of mischief. Both of them gave Thor a run for his money. Let's find out how. One time, Thor and Loki were journeying far from Asgard one fine evening in Thor's goat-drawn chariot when night fell, and a farmer's family invited them to their home. Thor offered his goats as payment for their hospitality, sure that he could resurrect them later on without suffering any loss. Following the feast, Thor told his host to lay the bones on the goats' hides after the flesh had been removed from them. He then applied the goats' coats on the ground. The farmer had 2 kids, Röskva, a daughter, and Thialfi, a boy. Despite the thunder god's orders, Thialfi split open one of the goat's legs, sucked out the marrow, and then glued it to the hide with the others. The following morning, when Thor awoke, he blessed the goat skins and bones with his hammer, and the goats came to life again, but one of them had a limp back leg. Thor quickly understood the cause of this and was so enraged at the farmer and his family that he would have slain all of them on the spot had the farmer not offered him his children, Thialfi and Röskva, to be his servants. So the goats with disabilities were left behind while Thor, Loki, and the kids continued on foot. The party's objective was to go to Jotunheim, the giant's native territory. They traveled across a dense forest and an ocean and arrived in a large hall as night was beginning to fall, where they chose to spend the night because they couldn't find anyone inside. A powerful earthquake jolted them awake. They came across a sleeping giant running outdoors, whose snores made the ground tremble. Thor, who hated giants, clenched his hammer and decided to strike down this certain foe. But the giant awoke at the last second and seemed to be cheered, or at least amused, by the sight of Thor and his companions. The giant presented himself as Skrymir, but claimed to know whom he was speaking to. Skrymir offered to go with Thor and his group, while still sleeping in the big hall where they had spent the previous night. The god agreed, and off they went through forests and hills. They sought refuge behind an old oak during the night. Skrymir had been carrying all of the provisions in the bag, and when Skrymir fell asleep, the god discovered that he could not undo the giant's knots. Again, Skrymir had been carrying all of the supplies in his bag. This infuriated Thor to the point where he hit Skrymir in the forehead, intending to kill him. The giant awoke calmly like nothing had happened and asked if a leaf had fallen on his head. Later during the night, the giant began to snore loudly, and his snores resounded through the valleys like thunder. Thor attempted to smite the giant a second time by striking him in the head. Because he was irritated by his inability to sleep and wanted to kill the giant anyhow. However, once again, Skrymir woke up completely unfazed and asked if an acorn had fallen on his head. Having had enough, Thor and his comrades parted ways with Skrymir, and the group moved forward in the direction of a fortress known as Útgarð. The tourists arrived at their destination at noon. Thor and the others discovered that they could easily squeeze through the extraordinarily huge openings between the gate's bars despite the gate being shut in the absence of anyone who could open it. They discovered a hall once inside where men were seated, eating and drinking. One of them was the giant Útgarda-Loki, the castle's ruler, who immediately recognized his new visitors and immediately began making fun of them for their short size. Wanting to salvage his dignity and that of his companions, Loki proudly declared that he was the fastest eater in this castle. Útgarda-Loki challenged him to prove his boast by entering a contest with one of the men there, whose name was Logi. They were instructed to race to the center of a meat trough with Loki and Logi at both ends. They crossed paths at the same point, but Logi had consumed the flesh, bones, and even the trough itself, while Loki had finished only the meat. Between the end and the center, Loki had undoubtedly failed. Then, Thialfi, a man of great speed, promised to race everyone in the castle. He was taken to a racetrack by Útgarda-Loki, who chose one Hugi to compete against him. When Hugi finally reached the finish line, he was so far ahead of Thialfi that he had to go back and meet him. When they raced again, Hugi prevailed over Thialfi by a significant margin. They continued to run, but Thialfi did much worse. He was still in the middle of the track when Hugi crossed the finish line. Thor then announced an invitation to everyone in the palace to participate in a drinking competition. One of Útgarda-Loki's slaves went to get the type of drinking horn that Útgarda-Loki's warriors were rumored to use. When it was placed in front of Thor, Útgarda-Loki explained that whoever managed to finish the horn in one drink was regarded as a great drinker, whereas whoever did so in two was regarded as fair. However, he added that none of the members of his retinue were such harmful drinkers as to be unable to finish it in three. Thor drank mightily, but the liquor level in the horn had barely lowered by the time he had to pause for a breath. He so gave it another go, struggling to gulp till he ran out of air. The level had significantly decreased this time, but most of the horn was still there. So even though his third drink was more potent than the first two combined, there was still enough left over. But at that point, Thor could not continue drinking and gave up. Then Útgarda-Loki advised that Thor try to pick his cat up off the ground, but even this, Thor was unable to do. In a rage, Thor challenged anyone in the castle to wrestle with him. Útgarda-Loki insultingly selected an elderly lady as one of his attendants, Ellie. The mighty god, however, failed in this battle also. Útgarda-Loki decided to end the competition at that point, and the group spent the night at the castle. They got up the next morning and got ready to go. Thor was told by Útgarda-Loki, who had just shown them out of the fortress, "Now that you have left my castle, I shall see to it that you never enter it again." He then revealed to them what had truly happened during their battles. He told them that the knot on the giant's provision bag that Thor almost succeeded in untying had been wrought in iron. The giant had dodged Thor's strikes from the hammer instead of hitting his face. He struck the mountainside and cut 3 enormous canyons into it. The giant would have immediately died if Thor had struck him. Loki's opponent in the eating competition was actually fire itself, so considering he did pretty well. In the same way, Thialfi was a racing force no one could ever hope to overcome. The giants were genuinely concerned that Thor would drink it all because the other end of the horn he drank from was linked to the sea. Útgarða-Loki told them that they would be able to see how much Thor had decreased the sea's level when they passed over it again. The cat was actually the Midgard serpent, whom he succeeded in raising out of the ocean and into the sky. And finally, he wrestled against old age and took a long, long time to fall. Then he told Thor to leave and never dare to make a return again. Thor was so furious at this demeaning trickery that he lifted his hammer in readiness to kill Útgarða-Loki and destroy his fortress. However, as he turned to do so, he saw no giant and no castle, just a vast, empty plain. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed watching it, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss our future uploads. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay mythically mad.